Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to Chemtrails on Trial, an 8-part series produced by Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. If you would like access to the entire series right now, join us on patreon.com/Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. The following episode deals with the conspiracy theory. This is episode 2.
Right, so the very first time, well, actually, this isn't true. I've already lied to you. The second time that chemtrails were mentioned in any sort of big way was on Coast to Coast with Art Bell. And this was on the 17th of March in 1999. It was actually only Somewhere in Time program, and the program's called Chemtrails with Linda Moulton Howe and William Thomas.
Ah, Linda.
Yeah, Linda Moulton Howe, or as she's known in the industry, Linda Moulton Hot. She's not, I've just made that up. And William Thomas. And William Thomas is the person that basically sort of brings the concept of chemtrails to the foray. Just to explain, Art Bell, everybody who's into conspiracy will know of Art Bell. He's done various radio shows for years. He's interviewed all sorts of people and popularized all sorts of different...
including Neil Sanders.
Yes. In fact, I was either I can never find out which it was. I was either the last or the second to last person to be interviewed by Art Bell. And then shortly after that, he retired because somebody shot at him through his living room window. It wasn't me. Right, I'm telling you, I promise you, it wasn't me. But yes, he's sort of a bit of a legend in the milieu. Him and George Noory did Coast to Coast for many years, and all sorts of famous things. Art Bell was, I'm right, Art Bell was the guy who got the famous Area 51 call where the bloke's melting down and saying, like, you know, there's aliens and blah, blah, blah. Like, people should look that up. That's an interesting call.
I think I've seen that actually, just like around,
It's famous, it's an infamous clip.
Yeah, he claims, I forget exactly, they're cloning politicians or something, and it's like a mass takeover, everyone's going to die and stuff like that, and it's, but then it cuts out a couple of times, doesn't it? As if, and actually, didn't the radio station, like, suddenly get shut down in a mysterious manner halfway through the call?
Which I don't know. They probably set that up.
well, it intimated, obviously, that basically, you know, this somebody from government was listening and they didn't want us to be out. So it was there. So that's who Art Bell is. Linda Moulton Howe is a journalist who's mostly interested in UFOs, crop circles, and cattle mutilations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But she's done lots of stuff. She was a regular guest on Coast to Coast. I think she used to do some stuff with David Icke, but I may have got that wrong. And
she's just so connected with so many of the people.
Oh, is she? Right.
The 90s and 2000s, absolutely. She's in a bunch of Ancient Aliens episodes as well nowadays.
Oh, is she? That makes sense because she was an advocate of both crop circles and cattle mutilations. She also she said something crazy like that Jesus is an alien that was brought to Earth to make everybody be nice to one another or something like that.
Well, that's a nice thing, actually.
Yeah, isn't it? Like, you know, it's not bad.
Better than invading us with ray guns, but...
Yeah. Well, again, and if we're honest, it didn't really work. But hey ho, you know, you can't have everything, can you? So this is interesting because William Thomas has been on the show before, and he'd explained his observations, but Art Bell had just not clicked with it. It just was like, I don't really understand what you're saying. It was a very, very short segment. Basically, William Thomas had come on and said, these contrails are persistent. These aren't normal. There's something going on. And Art Bell was like, but it's just stuff that comes out the back of planes. It's exhaust fumes, mate. And sort of not really taking it seriously. Then William Thomas had sort of presented more evidence to Art and convinced him to go back on the show. And it was him and Linda Moulton Howe. And this is the interesting thing because the William Thomas bit is a bit like, they're still not quite sure of him. they're letting him on, but he's certainly not the main guest. He's just somebody that's coming on to sort of like tell you something interesting, a bit of a filler to sort of get through the last hour, so to speak. But Art never calls them chemtrails, or at least initially doesn't call them chemtrails. And he ties it back to UFOs. The first thing that he says is that he saw many years ago a UFO that was trailing a plane in the contrail. And he speculates, says, why would UFOs be interested in the contrails? And he thinks there must be something in them, from intergalactic away. They've decided to come and they're sort of checking this out. And he'd asked his previous guest, someone called Dr. Lorraine Day, said,
I asked her whether the U.S. would spray or conduct biological warfare on its own people, and there wasn't even a beat miss. She said yes, of course.
And so he's started to entertain the idea that this might be biological warfare. Lorraine Day actually promotes alternative cancer treatments. She is, I don't want to skew it already, but she's described on Quack Watchers untrustworthy and extremely dangerous to people with cancer. But anyway, Art wants to know whether she thinks that the government would do nefarious programs to its own population, and she says yes. And then Linda steps up and she says,
well, it was at the end of February when I was in Sedona, Arizona, to speak at a conference there, and several of us went outside to go to lunch. But we were stopped cold by what was in the sky. A large silver airplane at very high altitude was making a perfect and very large white X in a very blue sky that stretched from the western horizon all the way up to and past the zenith. It was a huge X. And then we realized that there were other large X's in the sky, and within a couple of hours, it was totally overcast with clouds, and this was Sedona, Arizona, a desert community. A couple of days later in Phoenix, I saw similar large X's in a blue sky that became overcast.
They also point out that on March the 4th, the Mile Murphy Show, which is another radio show, had a call with people saying that they'd seen similar things happening in Missouri and surrounding states. So for whatever reason, this idea of chemtrails is starting to sort of build within certain places in America. And then they play a call from a listener, and he basically describes the same thing. He says, I saw 8 contrails that eventually covered the previously blue sky. Something's weird, and I don't know what it is, but something is going on. And Linda Moulton Howe, she says that she spoke to a couple of pilots who said that the X's
might result from the normal crossing corridors of military and civilian air traffic, but that would not explain what he just described of 7 contrails seeming to form at the same exact time, and the seemingly deliberate creation of that big, huge X in Sedona by one plane that we watched make the X.
So she's saying, all right, fair enough, these might be the fact that planes do have similar flight paths, but it doesn't explain why the clouds are lingering and why they seem to be so sort of precise and why they're covering the entire sky. And Art says that he's basically been receiving thousands of messages saying exactly the same, that something is going on with the sky. And Art brings back up his UFO. He says, well, the UFO I saw in the contrail was a couple of years ago, so is it possible that they're monitoring these contrails? And Linda interjects and says that she'd actually interviewed a man named Matthew Durant who had also seen a similar UFO in a contrail.
Well, I've lived here in New Mexico my whole life, and you get used to this big blue sky, and these contrails are not normal. They linger far too long, and then they spread out, and they tend to cloud over the entire sky eventually.
And Art Bell says,
I'm telling you, folks, I would have said, a few years ago, contrails? Of course there's contrails, dummy! There's jets up there. But I'm afraid that I'm now beginning to believe there really is more to this story.
And this is kind of like the clever thing of the theory. If you're going to sort of depopulate the planet or you're going to do something, like, you would put it in something that people go, yeah, we can see it. And if we're being brutally honest, there's been examples of things put in exhaust fumes. Like there was an example where in San Francisco during the sort of MK Ultra tests, the American government drove around in a specially converted car that was pumping certain poison gases out into the street to see what the effects would be. They've also done similar things in underground stations and stuff like that to test to see what would happen if a real attack occurred. So you can again see this tying in with sort of previous ideas of conspiracy theories. Art says, it wouldn't have been too long ago if somebody had said, oh my God, Art, the contrails are going to kill us. I'd have said, it's lock-up time, white coats, bring in the counsellors, we've got a problem here. But I'm sorry, I'm coming round to believe that there really is something going on. Then Art basically brings on the special guest, William Thomas.
I don't know if you could say he's the guy that got all of this started, but he certainly is a brave person out on the edge reporting the story that, if you sit and listen, will astound, and if the contrails don't do it, the story certainly will sicken you. When I first approached this story, I approached it with real caution. I'm really sorry to say that I'm becoming a believer reluctantly and sadly, underlined sadly.
So William Thomas is introduced, and he's a journalist, and he's done some serious work in the past. He did a Gulf War documentary called Echo War, and it won the 1991 US Environmental Film Festival Award for Best Documentary or Short. So, he's pretty good at what he does. He's not just some guy off the street. So Art wants to know his story. He says, okay, William, how did you become suspicious of contrails? And William says,
contrails are sometimes contrails, and it appears, Art, that sometimes they're not contrails. And as an investigative journalist for some 30 years, I am excruciatingly aware that every time I report on this story, I put my reputation and credibility on the line, and I'm ready to do that tonight with some new information. But as you say, let's start at the beginning. Well, this story got my attention 8 or 9 weeks ago, when my life was turned completely upside down and taken over with a story, as you say, that has got real legs. I've never seen anything like this story in 30 years. Yep. 8 weeks ago, I got a call from my managing editor at Environment News Service saying, check out this guy named William Wallace.
Now, some of you might be going, William Wallace.
Braveheart, yeah.
Exactly. Now, whether William Wallace is this bloke's name, or whether it's a pseudonym or what, I suspect it's a pseudonym tying in with the concept of freedom, which is a thing that truthers like, basically. So I don't think it's his real name. But it doesn't really matter. What had happened is Wallace had sent this video over to William Thomas, and he didn't really even have an explanation to it. But he says,
down in Washington State, Mr. Wallace reports that he has been watching jet aircraft, very large aircraft, flying back and forth over his remote mountain cabin for hours and days, laying down a grid-like pattern of contrails that he says has made himself and his wife Anne very ill, as well as a neighbor living nearby.
So they live in some sort of mountain community, basically, bit rural, bit isolated from people, little bit Randy Weaver maybe, but basically, they've been noticing planes leaving these grid patterns across the sky, and this has corresponded with themselves and their neighbour getting ill with sort of respiratory type diseases, apparently. So Wallace actually sent Thomas a video, and Thomas said,
as a former member of the military and a former pilot, I was quite attentive and then disturbed to see something very unusual. In that, yes, indeed, these large aircraft, which turned out to be KC-10, KC-135 type tanker aircraft, we managed to get a positive ID on them later.
Oh, that's important. KC-135s, those are refueling craft, and what else?
KC-10, another refueling craft.
Both refueling.
2 different configurations of airplane, but they both refuel fighters in flight.
Right.
Okay, so we have the tankers going back and forth in this video, and I'm watching what appeared to be contrails spread out, and instead of dissipating like contrails almost always do within 45 seconds or a minute, these hung in the sky for minutes and hours. They spread out, and they formed an overcast. And I watched, in somewhat disbelief, a clear blue sky become totally overcast. What was going on here? Well, Mr. Wallace suggested I contact Dr. Greg Hanford down in Bakersfield, California.
Now, Dr. Greg Hanford is actually a dentist, but in 1996, he started photographing contrails because he noticed the correspondence between seeing these lingering contrails in the sky and his receptionist and several of his patients became ill. And so he made the connection. And if you think about it, that's actually 3 years before William Thomas got on this. So it would appear that the initial sort of source of the concern was a dentist from California. And then this William Wallace found out about it. But it was William Thomas was the first person to sort of publicize the theory to the masses via this Art Veld show. And so Thomas says that at the time, hospitals in Bakersfield were jammed with patients with a flu-like upper respiratory infection. And, you know, this corresponds with what the dentist saw. And Art remembers a study that was recently advertised in a local radio that asked people with flu-like conditions to call them on a hotline. Some people's treatment is offered for free if they meet certain criteria, like if they've been ill, how long they've been ill for, where they've been, etc., etc., etc. And Thomas thinks that, well, that's a bit sketchy, isn't it? All these people had flu at the time when this person was reporting chemtrails or lingering contrails, as they're called, and then some agency offers certain people treatment for this. Well, Thomas thinks that this is obviously, and I quote, a bioweapon simulation tracking program. And, you know, the evidence for it is strong. Anyway, Thomas has reports of these trails in 43 states, and he has interviewed 400 eyewitnesses, including the police, pilots, and members of the military, and they've all reported seeing these lingering contrails. And Art starts to warn him that actually this is dangerous, Thomas. This is really dangerous to expose. But Thomas points out that actually, strangely, he hasn't received any threats. He hasn't received anything that he would, you know, class as sort of an indication that his life is in danger or that the government are onto him or anything like that. And Art just tells him to be careful. Art then remembers, actually, you know, the previous caller that spoke about chemtrails, he described the sky looking sort of iridescent, like it was oily behind these sort of chemtrails, like it was like, you know, when you get petrol on a puddle?
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. And William Thomas says, I had an experience just 2 weeks ago.
I'm out here on the west coast of Canada. I was driving into town one afternoon, and I had heard of some reports of chemtrails, as I call them.
So that is the first time that we get the name chemtrails, basically, as far as I can tell.
And I had heard of some reports of chemtrails, as I call them, being laid over the coast here. And I saw a contrail, what I thought was a contrail. And I said, now, let's not be paranoid here. Let's take it easy.
Right.
And I watched this thing, and by gosh, it didn't dissipate at all. It spread out. It hung in the air just like the chemtrails I'd been reporting. I remembered to do something, Art. I remembered some advice someone gave me, and I put on my sunglasses, my polarizing sunglasses.
Yes.
And I nearly crashed the car. I'm not exaggerating. When I looked up, I saw, instead of this white cloud, a rainbow-colored prismatic bar of light. It looked like an oil stain in a puddle. It was a chemical signature. And when I removed my sunglasses, I saw a pretty white cloud.
So basically he says that when he's looking through the lens of his sunglasses, he can actually see what looks like almost petrol behind these chemtrails, as he called, which indicates to him that there's something other than, you know, water vapor out the back of an exhaust. There's something chemical there, and there's something nefarious. Also, when he says polarizing sunglasses, I'm assuming that he means that's something to do with the lens, not that some people really like them and some people absolutely hate them. Right? So just in case anyone was wondering about that.
How it works, I can remember this from physics class like 10, 15 years ago, is that essentially it's got like a slap pattern, so it only, like if an electromagnetic wave is leaned, it doesn't go through. It only goes through if it's straight.
Oh, okay.
On, but if it's a different angle, so that's what it's polarizing. It polarizes the light, so you get less light coming through.
Ah.
I mean, I've never looked at a contrail with sunglasses on, but I think I'll have to do it now, won't I?
Well, this is it. You're going to have to see if William Thomas is accurate.
Hello, initiates of the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast. Dom Jolly here. How are you? Sorry to butt in, but I just wanted to let you know that I've written, well, a book that I'm very, very proud of called The Conspiracy Tourist, in which I travel around the world taking a look at the weird world of conspiracies, and I think you might like it. Not only that, but I'm touring the book and doing live shows all around England from the 28th of Feb to the end of March, and it would be smashing to see you there. I think you'd like it. If you are interested, go to my website, www.domjolly.tv. And now, on with the podcast. Thanks.
But to be fair, it's not just William Thomas. Other people have reported a similar phenomenon with chemtrails. So it's not a one-off. Other people have said that they've seen the very same thing. Anyway, art speculates that maybe these chemtrails are some sort of mass inoculation by the government to protect us from a potential terrorist attack, which is actually quite sort of against type for art. Like he's saying, well, maybe it's a good thing. Like maybe they want to protect us from something that's horrible, like a chemical attack or whatever. But they don't want to tell us that there might be a chemical attack because this will cause panic and confusion and people to be suspicious of the government. So instead, they're going to surreptitiously spray it through the engines of planes and protect us without our knowledge. Like a man hanging outside a dormitory with a hammer. Anyway, but he says that's the best case scenario for chemtrails. But William Thomas isn't so sure.
It is possible, Art. The people working with me on this story have come forward in the last few days with some compelling information on inhalation vaccine, something that's been studied commercially since the 1970s and whispered about by the military since the 80s. That is a possibility. However, the lab tests we've gotten back so far are of substances that you certainly wouldn't want to ingest, and as far as we can tell, with a very few samples, admittedly.
So William Thomas is already sort of, pouring scorn on that. Apparently he tested something, they've got samples of these chemtrails somehow, and it doesn't look good.
It's an interesting correlation already, though, like with the vaccines and stuff.
Well, this is it, But at this point, basically, aren't speculating because he doesn't know. This is a very, very new phenomenon to him. And he's hoping that there's a benevolence behind it. But William Thomas is not really convinced by that. He thinks that, no, it's probably something nasty due to the samples that he's taken. He says,
I can build a theoretical case for inoculation. I can build a very good case for weather modification, and I can build a case for pathogens deliberately making people very ill.
And then they also point out that one of the ways that you can spot if it's a chemtrail as opposed to a contrail is that contrails don't stop and start. So you wouldn't see a line that's got gaps in it because basically, what they're saying is that it should disappear anyway. But if you're seeing sort of a solid line and then there's gaps in it, that they're saying is completely unnatural and indicates that this is when they've turned the spray on, then turned the spray on, then turned the spray on. Like potentially in that thing, perhaps they've got a clogged nozzle or something like that. But basically the point is that, again, this is all indications that there's something unnatural that doesn't normally happen with either clouds or jet exhausts.
We do have some evidence, and we have a high-ranking American military officer telling us tonight that, folks, these are not contrails. We have people noting all over the United States that commercial aircraft flying at or near the exact same altitude of these unmarked white tanker-type aircraft emit normal contrails that disappear quickly, while the contrails coming from the tankers flying almost alongside do not dissipate but persist for many hours. I have a report just this morning of aircraft, commercial jets near an airport attempting to dive under the chemtrail from a tanker. We have a Major General Barlow from the Office of the Adjutant General, Camp Murray, Tacoma, Washington, in a signed letter 2 weeks ago saying, quote, our KC-135 jet aircraft operate at altitudes below 33,000 feet, which is typically the altitude where jet contrails form.
So that is quite the bombshell, because basically he's saying that we've got high-ranking military officers saying that these aren't actually contrails. He doesn't say which ones, probably because they want to, not risk their sort of future in the military. But he also says that there's a General Barlow from Camp Murray who's signed a letter saying that, our refueling tankers only fly at a certain altitude. And William Thomas is saying that the altitude that they fly at, 32,000 feet, is below the altitude where contrails would form because it's not cold enough and the atmospheric conditions aren't correct. So if all of that is true, that's building a very, very strong case. He also points out that some planes that seem to be flying at exactly the same height, some leave contrails and some don't leave persistent contrails, which is another indication that something fishy is going on. And he says, so this Major General is saying that our tankers do not emit contrails ever. They don't fly high enough. So if this Major General is saying that they don't produce contrails ever, and they're producing chemtrails, well, something's not quite right here. And the inference that you would have to take is that these aren't normal chemtrails then. And William Thomas backs this up. He says he's seen chemtrails coming out of the tails of these tankers, not the engines or halfway up the wing, not the tip of the wing and not the engine, but out the back of the tails of these planes. He also says,
and finally, we have many reports, many videos and photographs, very disturbing art at a low level. I'm talking below 9,000 feet. Contrails physically cannot form ever at that altitude. Biological agents, known pathogens, organisms that come from research laboratories are being spread by these chemtrails. That is fact, and we'll get into some proof in a moment. Okay. Number two, we have indications from those same samples that there are components that are involved with weather modification, and something you're well aware of with your frequent guest, Dr. Nick Begich, something called HARP up in Alaska. I would remind the people who have been telling me that these are just contrails that if they haven't heard enough yet tonight to disabuse them of that notion, I would hope that they could answer and tell me how in the world a jelly-like goop continues to fall from supposed vapor trails of aircraft.
And this is a thing called star jelly, okay? And this is a genuine, again, phenomenon that says that basically when these chemtrails have happened, this weird gelatinous goo is found beneath where they've been. And there was several cases. There's one in Glasgow that was quite recent. They're referring to a 1994 event in Oakville. Basically, they found that this strange goo, they couldn't figure out what it was, but it contained DNA. And so, yeah, they're very concerned as to what this actually is. And William Thomas mentions that there's a bacteria called Pseudomonas. Oh, good God, I can't read my own writing. Pseudomonas. Oh, God. Pseudomonas ergonis, which he said is completely associated with chemtrails. I don't wish to blind you with science, so, you know.
So one thing I'll bring up here is that's quite an interesting element to it, because like for the average person, like they think they're spraying, bacteria out the engine, but obviously the engine's like 1500 degrees, so it would just obliterate any bacteria and kill it. So obviously saying that it has to come out the tails or somewhere else on the wing, that actually kind of gets around that sort of usual objection.
And it's a real thing. I could show you photographs of this star jelly. Like it is a genuine thing that some people have connected to chemtrails. To say literally everything that William Thomas has said in this interview is observable. The things about the clouds, the thing about the way that they spread, the things about the gaps in them. you can go out on certain days and see that happening. The petrol-like iridescence in the sky, that is a thing that has been observed. The only things that he hasn't sort of backed up is he's told us about the samples they've collected and said that they contain dangerous things, and he referenced a high-ranking military officer, but we haven't actually been told who these people are. But he says,
we had better be alert, especially for our children and our grandparents, and I would suggest that people simply observe these contrails over the space of just a few minutes. Check them out, go on about your business, have another look. Have they dispersed? Have they disappeared? If not, look closer. If the observed signature from an aircraft, this white billowy trail off the wings or especially off the tail section, if that does not dissipate but actually spreads out and seems to linger, and especially if it appears to go from horizon to horizon, I would suggest that you take cover and get your children under cover, probably for the rest of the afternoon, the rest of the day.
And William Thomas actually postulates at a time, the big X's that they leave in the sky, these lingering contrails or chemtrails as he's now calling them.
Yeah.
He suggests that this is potentially so that satellites can monitor the experiment, or that they can see which areas of the country have been sprayed. So it's almost like sort of ticking off.
X marks the spot.
Very much so, yeah. Basically.
Yeah. So also, he's advising essentially lockdowns there, which is not something conspiracists are into here.
That's a very good point, actually, yeah. But he takes it seriously. He says, basically, get inside. If you see these sort of persistent clouds, run. And don't run to the hills, because then you'll be closer to the clouds. So, run away from the hills if possible.
To your bunker.
Secret bunkers, this is the thing. Oh, God. Oh, it'd be nice if they got fashionable again. But William Thomas says he's been in touch with Joe Burton from Tennessee, who's been also researching chemtrails. He says in 1998 he went hiking, he felt ill, and he started to urinate blood and to cough up blood. He says his dog was also affected, and at the time he saw strange clouds or fog with silver particles in it. William says, has this gentleman's lab results. He says that also his wife had a sore throat for 3 days and spat up jelly, and that he has joint pain and tenderness. And William Thomas had used a device on this bloke, Joe Burton, called the Body Scan 2010, and it revealed that organisms had entered his lungs and attacked his liver and gallbladder and his only kidney, because he was, he'd had a kidney removed previously.
So with this guy, was his semen also overloaded with blood?
You're thinking he's Jackie Devoy's mate, are you?
Yes.
It may well have been. That could have been Jackie. That's when he phoned him. I'm just going on the Body Scan 2010, Jackie. So he needed to purge these 2 unidentified chemicals from his body using the Body Scan 2010. Otherwise, he would have died. And then just to sort of finish up on this very first sort of William Thomas, he cites a document as proof that chemtrails exist. And this document is called Owning the Weather, or he refers to it as Owning the Weather. It's actually called Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. And it's a 1996 document that was released by the American Air Force. And it includes the chapters, why would we want to mess with the weather? What do we mean by weather modification? Applying weather modification to military operations. And it has chapters specifically on how to create rain and fog and storms. And it also talks about exploiting the ionosphere for communications purposes. So that kind of feeds into the idea that maybe this metal or whatever, these chemicals, are part of some sort of communications grid, maybe even connected to HAARP, that they're using to sort of maybe, send sort of encrypted messages or something like that across the world. But this is a genuine document. Genuine, absolutely 100% real, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025.
Thank you for listening to Chemtrails on Trial, produced by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders for Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. And don't forget, If you can't wait for next week, do join us on patreon.com/Some Dare Call It Conspiracy, where you'll not only be able to get the entire series right now, but also ad-free episodes, plus tons of other goodies, including my music, Neil's books, audiobooks of Neil's, and art by Nicholas Seagray. You can also find all our links at www.somedarecallitconspiracy.com.